Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 7, Episode 3 of our weekly Q&A series. This is available as both podcast and video, so if you're currently on the video, you can check the links in the description to access this on all the major podcasting platforms if you want to download it and take it with you. Although, I think right now, you can probably listen to it just as well on YouTube because it's a lot less likely for you to be going a place where you don't have Wi-Fi.
Yes, that's true.
So, because we're all mostly in our homes.
It's true. Well, I guess it depends on what country you're in. I think some countries are adjusting a little differently than others.
That's true, and whether or not you're in essential service, although the commute will be
and
quicker.
This is going to be part of our talk, too.
Yeah, so last week we decided it was important to not talk about the coronavirus.
But we wandered into it anyways.
We wandered a little bit into it at the end. And this week we're going to be talking, I think, mostly about politics and the coronavirus.
So hear me out a little bit. So we've been doing this for a long time. I don't know how many hundreds of videos that we've done.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how many dozens of those are Q&A where we're sitting and talking about stuff. And you'd think, like, if you told me 2 years ago that when we started doing this that we would have that many videos of us just, having conversation about things, I would have thought that you were crazy.
Yeah.
So it's hard, I think, to avoid going into the places that I spend a lot of time thinking about during the week.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, we've made our politics pretty clear on the show. We just sort of chat about what we're interested in. I think one of my favorite comments of all time was that dude who said that he used to like us until we just started being, like, repeating liberal talking points.
Yeah.
And I still think about that every once in a while and smile because that's my favorite reason that anybody has ever said they stopped watching us.
Well, all right, so that thing about accusing people of having talking points, I think it's definitely an insult when you are talking about stuff that you're just regurgitating, right? Like, there's no sort of internal logical consistency.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really understand the point. You can't really defend it. So I get that. But what's funny is that people who throw that out as some sort of insult, but it's something that we've come to on our own, but they've somehow lumped us in. Because seriously, the expression is, we've got no dog in this fight. We've got no horse in this race. We are neither Republicans or Democrats.
Oh, yeah, when we talk about American politics, yeah, especially.
Yeah. So it's funny because, talking points are usually this kind of stuff that you pass along to people because you want them to be able to sort of propagate the ideas without necessarily having the wherewithal to come to it themselves.
I also just think it's a little bit funny because calling somebody out for just like repeating other people's talking points is itself just sort of one of those default responses to...
Yeah, it's a generic response,
yeah,
right?
so it is almost a talking point by itself.
That's true.
It's, that's besides the point.
It's become a cliche. Okay.
So we'll get into the first question because we're already sort of on it, but this will at least crystallize it a little bit so that we can at least pretend that this is still like a Q&A.
Right.
This isn't even a question, it's just a comment. But Scarlett Enby says, "Lol, I'd love to just have a podcast where you rant about Trump and pandemics." And you're in luck, I guess.
I guess. All right, so
good for you.
Part of the background is, again, without trying to dox myself too much, I mean, clearly this is, even if you're not worried about it, this is very much on people's minds.
Yeah.
And the degree to which it's on your mind, I guess, it varies a lot too. Some people think they're calling it a bit of a overblown hoax. And
some people are really not worried about it.
Yeah. All right. So
there's this dude that I barely know who on his Instagram story posted, like, he looks like he's at like a party, like just in like the forest somewhere. There's like a bunch of people. Like, I'm like, I don't know what you're doing.
Right.
But you should not be.
They are putting their white blood cells to work.
There we go.
Okay.
That's a reference to the 36 Questions, the podcast. It's a podcast musical.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So,
I didn't realize. Okay, I knew it was because I'd heard the song. I didn't realize.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyways, just a few sort of random thoughts and a few sort of focused thoughts. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, I feel like I'm almost burnt out. Like, the idea of coming to this podcast and having to shift gears too much was draining. I thought, well, thankfully, one of our newest patrons,
Scarlett Enby,
is giving us not so much an excuse, but a doorway into doing this. Because, all right, so
not that we needed it last week.
Yeah. So I think even when we're actively avoiding it, so I think one of the things that struck me, because I was actually watching. I mentioned this, right? I was watching a basketball game when the NBA canceled the season, and looking back on it, even just this close in time, I think history is going to really look at Adam Silver in the NBA, and I don't know how you can avoid acknowledging that they not only did the right thing, but they were instrumental in North America shifting gears. They were the first major professional organization that made a huge change in the way they normally do business, in a way that actually potentially costs them a huge amount of business.
Yeah, because they, unlike a lot of other places who actually can sort of have a stopgap measure of like working from home and doing other stuff, if you don't play, you can't, like there's no product.
Right.
There's no keeping sort of the lights on even, really. Like the whole thing that everything else hinges on, like the keystone is taken out of the equation.
Right. But and I can't even express to you my sense of how hard it must have been for them to do, because in general, whenever there's something big, whenever there's a crisis, whenever you need to do something way different than you ever did before, most people are reluctant to do that because it feels like, I don't really want to be the one that does the first thing in case I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And people look at me and think, oh, they're just a drama queen. They're making a big deal out of nothing.
Yeah, you want to be able to point to a precedent.
Right. And so if you turn out to be wrong, you say, well, I was just, this was the information I was working with. I was a little bit misled. I was whatever, right?
Yeah, and you go, well, look at this other person who did it before me. All these other people were already shutting down. I was doing it because that was where the culture was at.
Sure. So to me, like the first mover with something as important as this, and again, I'm sure we'll get people arguing with us about how important it is, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but I think the best thing that I've ever seen Adam Silver and the NBA do was this. Like, I can't imagine how hard it would have been to do that.
Yeah.
So the other thing that strikes me, and again, I mean, COVID has been talked, and the pandemic has been talked about ad nauseum, and I want to make sure that we talk about something that is either of specific interest to us or that we can contribute something meaningful. And the one thing I want to talk about was the whole idea that's come up recently. I mean, we are timely, if nothing else, and it's already out of the news cycle in a couple days, but the idea of calling the SARS-CoV or CoV-2 virus, which is responsible for COVID, the disease 19, calling it the Chinese virus. And so what I've been seeing maybe not whenever, but a lot of time if anybody ever criticizes, in general, the use of the term Chinese virus, and specifically Donald Trump using it, there's almost always somebody defending it by pointing out and listing all these other diseases and viruses that are named after the places where they originated. Because that's the argument, right? That it's totally justified. It's nothing racist about it. That you're just calling it Chinese virus because it came from China.
Yeah.
All right. So the examples. Sorry, go ahead.
It's just funny because even from a starting point, we already know how borderline obsessed Donald Trump is with using China in so much of his strategy and so much of his discussion of the world.
Right.
And I think it was at its fever pitch during the actual campaign itself, but we know how much Donald Trump loves to talk about China, so it shouldn't be surprising to anybody
Yes
that he's talking about it as the Chinese virus.
Because officially, I mean, when it started off, it was called the Wuhan virus because that was the city that came in. Province,
and that makes
Hubei.
some sense.
Sure. I'll grant you that, because the examples that people pick are the norovirus that originated in Norwalk, Ohio. Rocky Mountain spotted fever that started in Snake River Valley, Idaho. And I'm just using exampps that are from the States, and there's a reason. Lyme disease, which came from Old Lyme, Connecticut. And Ebola virus, which is not American, but it came from, named after the Ebola River in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So the first thing you'll probably notice is that none of them are named after countries. They're all named after very specific cities. I mean, unless you want to start calling the norovirus the Amerovirus. And Rocky Mountain spotted fever American spotted fever.
And in the case of Ebola, it's not even a city.
Right, it's a river.
And the other thing that you'll notice is no one was using the norovirus as an excuse to be racist to Ohioans.
Yes. I mean, here's the thing, right? So, that there's certain countries, and I don't know if there's many of them, where they're not just a country, right? Like, China is China. People from China are Chinese.
Yeah.
But as an ethnicity, and as a people, the Chinese identity extends sort of beyond the borders, where when people leave China, they're still considered Chinese, right? The way that, they're identified Chinese, and that other Asian countries are sort of lumped in together because apparently white people can't tell the difference between Asian people. So they'll look at somebody who's Japanese and think they're Chinese. Look at somebody who's Korean and think they're Chinese.
Yeah, Chinese is almost a default. It's like they're playing the numbers game.
Right.
And so they're just like, listen, if I say Chinese...
There's a better chance I'll get it right.
And they're East Asian. Yeah, they're like, well, if I say South Korean, like, you know...
Right. So there's definitely more associated with referring to something as Chinese than there is referring to something as American or Canadian or whatever, right?
Yeah, because it's like broad strokes. You got like what, like Europeans,
right?
And then and then people say, yeah, a lot of people do say Chinese. It's like East Asian, and then I guess like Southeast Asia is lumped together a little bit too.
Right.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, so I can't think of... Are there any other countries that are like that? Like, I mean, there's a continent, right? Like, you talk about Africa, for example. Yeah. Europeans, I guess, but without the stigma associated with
Europeans are broad. I mean, I think the examples I can think of is a lot of East Asian countries where it's like an ethnicity and a culture and everything. Like, to be Japanese, I think, has a similar sort of holistic thing.
Yeah.
And, like, South Korean, too, right?
Yeah, so...
Maybe Indian?
Maybe, although Indian is kind of a weird, kind of loaded term because of the way the European settlers thought that when they hit North America, they'd actually gone all the way around to India.
Yeah, and it's also a bit of a loaded term because there's so many people there, and there's a lot of sort of like subcultures there.
Yeah. So there's an interesting sort of, I guess, related point. So a lot of one of the other terms that people point out is the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
And how that wasn't a big deal. But if you actually look at some of the newspaper clippings from the time, Spain was actually
racist.
They were really peeved that they were calling it the Spanish flu.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that's part of the reason why the World Health Organization and maybe the CDC has pushed for a standardized way of naming diseases and newly discovered viruses, because besides being a little bit like vaguely racist, naming it after a certain region sort of clouds the issue a little bit, right? There's going to be people who think that the risk is from people from that area, that it's localized to that area, and that's where the highest risk is. And sometimes that may be true. Like MERS, which was the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, was like that because because it was so not infectious that the people that were getting it were really only in the Middle East, as opposed to this, which has become like,
it's
pandemic.
everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's worldwide. So that it has the it does sort of the triple whammy, right? It gives you a target for racists to hate. It gives you it lulls you in potentially a false sense of security, thinking, well, it's just from China. It's not. It's a Chinese virus. It's not going to affect us in North America.
Although I think as far as that goes, we're pretty aware.
We're past
the point where people think it's not going to be a North American thing.
Yeah, and somehow blaming the Chinese, because I mean, ultimately, I think probably the biggest factor in this is their wet markets, right? When you take a bunch of exotic animals, you bring them all together, you kill them in unhygienic conditions, then that's going to be sort of a cesspool of potential pathogens that can jump to human beings. But, I don't know that necessarily the Chinese government or the Chinese country or every Chinese person should be held responsible for the practices of few poorly informed, dirty, not so much dirty, I guess, unhygienic vendors.
Yeah, because I actually listened to something on it. It's actually the more wealthy people who are consuming these sort of things in the live market because they're fresher and they've got a lot of like exotic meats.
Right.
So it's actually
because it's expensive.
Yeah, it's like the minority. It's if there's any individual group that we should be a little bit pissed off at,
is rich people.
It's rich people, and potentially ineffective governments who are susceptible to lobbying.
Right. Yeah. No,
Like
no,
those are like the two sort of general groups, and so that sort of combined with what the culture of the rich, a certain portion of the rich in China was, which is to eat these like exotic things from the
what
wet
we should
market.
do is eat the rich. So, but all right. So the Spanish flu got blamed on Spain because everybody else during wartime, Spain was not involved in the war.
Yeah.
So they weren't censoring their news. So they were the only people talking about this infection that was happening that actually, by most accounts, is believed to have originated in Kansas, in the U.S. So that 1980 flu pandemic actually should have been the American flu.
Mm-hmm.
But it ended up being... So again, it's one of those other examples where people hold it up and say, wow, this is why we should be calling it it's not a bad thing to call it Chinese flu. It actually is. And the examples that they pick don't sort of bolster the case. They do the opposite. If anything, they point out, yeah, this is not a great way to be naming viruses. There's a lot of connotations that come with it that are probably not that productive.
Yeah, and like Ebola, even for not being named after a country, was totally used for racist sentiment too.
Sure.
Like that's just another example of somebody else doing the wrong thing.
Right.
It'd be like somebody coming in, like a serial killer coming to court with a list of other serial killers. It's not it's not particularly useful. It's like I don't know what point you're trying to make here.
Yeah.
We shouldn't have done it then. We shouldn't be doing it now.
Right. So yeah, well, I think that's perfect. That's actually you've put it perfectly, right? Because what you're doing to justify doing something kind of crappy now is pointing to history. And if history is ever an excuse to keep on doing crappy stuff, we'll never change.
Yeah, it's like, okay, well, slavery's fine.
Because they used to do it.
Yeah, pedagogy. We should have an established sort of social dynamic for having relationships with young boys.
Oh God, no, that's
by
not
their
pedagogy.
mentor
That's
figures.
Pederasty.
Pederasty.
That's what. There's an extra A.
What's pedagogy?
That's
That's something fine.
That has something to do
isn't
with
it?
like the way you teach, right? When you're a pedagogue.
I don't know. It's
Anyways,
never
sorry.
mind. Yeah, no, that's an important correction.
All right. So, and again, I'm not going to dox myself to when I talk about this. I do want to point out that I have a little bit of related, not so much expertise, but an education that allows me to parse out some of the information. And I want to point out a few things that are interesting about the pandemic that don't. I've got a few points. So don't get enough attention, that people maybe aren't talking about it enough. So instead of getting lost in the stats, because when people argue about whether this is significant or not, they say this is the number of people that have died, this is the number of people that are sick, this is how fast the infections are going, and you compare numbers from one disease to another, or one cause of death to another, and I think you get lost in the weeds in a way that's not good. The one piece of information that really clarifies everything is that Italy, I want to say running out, but they ran out of ICU beds. Italy ran out of ICU beds. So that's an intensive care unit, right? Where and you have to, if you're going to ventilate somebody. So ventilation is where you get a machine to breathe for somebody because they are so weak and so sick they can't breathe for themselves.
Yeah.
A first world country ran out of ICU beds. In the almost 50 years I've been alive, I have never, ever heard of a first world country running out of ICU beds. It just it's unprecedented. So maybe other things are more deadly. Maybe some other things are more infectious. But as far as the number of really sick people that need a lot of support, like medical support, this is unprecedented. Even like, listen, one hospital running out of ICU beds, sure. A city, maybe, I don't know enough, but a country. Yeah, and it's a first world country.
That's a lot.
It's kind of ridiculous. And, sort of related points, right? Like, people like to point out to these numbers when they say it's not such a big deal, right? They're saying, and again, even if they were right about it, it still is a big deal. They're saying that the deaths are skewing towards the older people. And they're saying, well, Italy, it's the oldest country in the EU by average age. It's that they smoke a lot, that whatever, right? So, and they're saying that it's not such a big deal because only the older are vulnerable, and they're using that as excuse for saying, lately they've been saying, well, I'm sure a lot of grandparents would be willing to sacrifice themselves for the economy and save the country for their grandchildren, which is by itself another ridiculous sentiment that I'd like to talk about.
It's like Soylent Green almost.
It is worse than that because
we don't even get the nutrition.
Yeah. And well, you know what? Why it's worse than Soylent Green? Because Soylent Green, at least they knew enough that it was bad that they hid it from people. Like, it was a secret.
That's true.
They didn't proudly proclaim it, saying this is why we need to get back to work and get the economy running again at the cost of a few million people that might die because they're old and they're willing to sacrifice themselves for. And just to be clear, I'm being sarcastic here. I am paraphrasing what they're saying. I don't believe this at all. I think it's a crappy argument.
Yeah.
But even then, it's not actually skewed as bad as you think, because think about it. So right now, Italy has the biggest number of deaths. They got 6,000 something. Mm-hmm. The next closest country only has 3,000. So Italy is like way ahead of everybody else. So their numbers skew everybody else's. So we've got a country that is doing battlefield triage. So triage is the idea that you prioritize who gets what.
Yeah.
And battlefield means that you're on the field of battle, you don't have enough resources. Battlefield triage, you pick the healthiest and the youngest people, the people you think are going to survive, have the best chance of survival, to save when you don't have enough bandages or
brutal.
tourniquets.
That's pretty brutal.
So what they're saying, the only treatment that we know is ventilating people. You're literally picking the people that are youngest to get the only treatment that you know will help. That you keep them breathing until their body has a chance to fight off the infection. Mm-hmm. And the other people, you're saying, you know what? I'm very sorry. We're out of ventilators, and you aren't on the list. So it's no surprise that the people who are not getting treatment are having worse outcomes.
Yeah.
And they are dying. I can't stress this enough. They are actively choosing to give the only known effective treatment to the younger and healthier people when they run out of enough treatment for everybody.
Yeah.
In a country that's overrun.
So that definitely makes it skew then, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, and the other argument that people are pointing out that they're using to reassure themselves that, it's no big deal. There's one number that 99% of people have premorbid conditions. Mm-hmm. And that's absolutely true. What's a premorbid condition? It might surprise you that high blood pressure is one of those premorbid conditions.
Mm. And that's common.
It's ridiculously common, and for most people, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, when you say high blood pressure, and I looked this up in Canada and in the world, it's about between 20 and 25% of people. So about 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 adults have high blood pressure.
Okay.
So when you say that 99% have something going on, and only 1% were perfectly healthy, if you had high blood pressure, you would not be and you got killed, you would not be considered that 1%. If anything, there is about 1 out of every 4 deaths that are happening. Mm-hmm. People have one condition. Another quarter have 2, and I think the rest have 3 or more, something like that. But so it's very likely, given how common high blood pressure is.
You know what? No matter whether or not your other numbers were right or wrong, the rest have 3 or more is definitely a correct statistic.
Yeah, no kidding. So it's actually hitting a lot of people who would consider themselves relatively healthy.
Mm.
So, yeah. And I guess the other point I wanted to make that I get, also I'm not seeing too much, is that people are saying that, well, they're overstating the number of deaths due to COVID-19 mm-hmm. because somebody in Italy was saying that if somebody had a heart attack but were sick with COVID-19, on the death certificate, they're going to say that the death was from COVID-19.
Yeah.
And they're saying, well, death was from heart attack. And I think people are missing the point a little bit, that when you have somebody mm-hmm. who has clogged arteries and they're in the hospital being ventilated because they're sick with COVID-19, and then they have a heart attack. Sure, the heart attack was the most proximate. It was the last thing that tipped them over the edge.
Yeah.
But why do you think they had a heart attack now? I mean, if you're looking at somebody who's lying in a bed who can't breathe for themselves because they're so exhausted from the sickness, I think it's not a stretch to say that really all that means is it's that really sick people are dying from it, mm-hmm. and it's not the heart attack that put them on a ventilator.
Yeah, it would be like saying the cause of death was lack of oxygen instead of COVID-19.
Oh yeah, you can say that, but listen, if you wanted to say that, you could say the cause of death for everybody was their heart stopped.
That's
right?
true.
Because unless if you're separating it from, say, brain death, right, where people are sort of brain dead and you keep them going because organ donation, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like to measure, there's different ways to measure death,
Yeah.
I guess, or to not measure it, but you know what I mean, to mark death, I guess. Then really, ultimately, you say their heart stopped. But now
well, you can't even just say their heart stopped, because sometimes people have their heart stop and then you just put
oh, that's true.
like artificial hearts or pacemakers.
Yeah. So it's a complicated thing, but I think a lot of the arguments to say that, well, somehow it's not a big deal. Really, again, if you want to just clear out all the weeds, it's that they're a first world country ran out of ventilators and ICU beds and had to start deciding who to let die and who to survive.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what we've seen with the panic and everything as a secondary effect is the issues are mostly collective ones, right? It's not.
What do you mean?
So the panic causing everybody to buy things, right? The people needing to social distance, right? Any one case, 80% of the cases or whatever the exact number is are mild to moderate, right?
Oh, okay, but mild just means that they didn't admit them.
Yeah.
In a situation where their hospitals are getting too full, they're actively turning away people who don't need ventilation they think could survive if they went home.
Yeah.
Under normal circumstances, that number would be a lot smaller, because if you'd had the capacity, you'd probably be admitting some of them. But in this case, you're actually pushing them away. Yeah. Oh, anyway, sorry.
But the point is that the vast majority of people, even if you're only looking at the percentage of people who are dying, right?
Yes.
On an individual basis, are you likely to die just from this? No.
No.
As any one individual person, assuming that you have access to resources while you're holed up, right?
Right.
Is this going to cost you your life? No. But on a collective level, there's going to be huge, huge costs.
Yeah.
Right? And so this is an issue that requires collective action, and it is an issue depending on who you are, if you're somebody in Italy, right, it is affecting, I think, everybody there, right? Almost everybody, knows somebody who is sick, something like that. Like, it's really sort of ravaging that population. But in places where it hasn't gotten bad yet, and where hopefully it won't get that bad if we have the right procedures in place, if we enact them.
If we have the right procedures, and if we have the will to follow through with them.
Then it's an issue of it's an issue of scale and collective action and sort of it's a lot of the damage is going to be spread around pretty evenly.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Just in terms of the panic, at least, not in terms of the actual people who are directly affected by the sickness.
Well, I mean,
the resources.
People with money are going to be able to better insulate themselves from it, and I think that relates to the next question that I had some ideas to talk about. But it's really, again, it comes back to eat the rich. Like, at some point, you got to start recognizing that the rich are, if not complicit in the beginning with in China with the wet market, they're complicit in the lack of a sufficient response to protect the people who need it.
Yeah, because the only people who are actually empowered to make decisions are politicians and businesses, basically, are the two big ones. Because people are relatively reliant on... People are reliant on livelihoods, and tons of people are reliant on their direct livelihood on a paycheck-to-paycheck basis.
Speaking of businesses, I saw a tweet from Elon... Is it Elon?
Elon Musk? Yeah.
Saying, you know what? We will start... I can't remember whether he was going to pay for it or he was going to help build it. We're going to start getting ventilators when we're running out. And Nate Silver, the guy from 538, the stats guy, says, yeah, we're running out now. And Elon Musk's reply was, oh, where? Like, to me, it almost captures perfectly where you've got a billionaire who's got the ability to make huge change.
Yeah.
Getting sort of the public attention for saying, yeah, I'm going to do something, and then not even having... I mean, this is what Let Me Google That For You was created for, right? Like, he's asking a stats guy to tell him where he needs to spend his money.
Yeah.
When... I mean, I don't even know know how to begin to talk about it. That it boggles my mind that a billionaire is that ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, listen, lots of other good things.
You know what? That reminds me of something else tangentially.
Okay.
So, do you remember when Notre Dame burned?
Yes, and they promised, nobody's given the money.
Yeah.
All those billionaires said, I'm going to give you this money to help you rebuild it. They all promised it at the time. They got the credit for pretending they would.
Mm-hmm. And they didn't do anything.
Right.
Yeah, and then there's the secondary thing where people at the time were, saying really, this, old, white European church is the thing that's getting money.
Yeah.
And it's not that, we can't give money to both things. It's not that
Right.
it isn't a landmark and that it shouldn't be rebuilt, but it is
Right.
true that, it was essentially just visibility and cachet that people were even offering.
Right.
But I think ultimately it turned out, because almost nobody gave any money, it's probably better for them to pretend to give money to some white European thing and give them false hope than it is for causes that actually need it. Right? If you're gonna say you're gonna do it and not do it, it's better when it's a building and not
Right.
a bunch of people's livelihoods that you're screwing over for publicity.
And I guess that's why they're businessmen. They're getting the most use out of their money, right? They're getting the value out of it without having to spend it.
They're getting their bang out of their theoretical buck.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah, so it's the same sort of thing that he's doing here.
Yes.
Maybe
Well, he is,
maybe he
but
ends up actually putting the money into it.
But again, he's promising something conditionally. Conditions met. And again, instead of moving and doing something about it like he can do in business, it's almost like he's looking for an excuse not to do something by saying, "Oh, where? I didn't know."
Yeah, a lot of what Elon does is based largely around sort of grand gestures that are of questionable efficiency, right? With the diver and stuff.
Right.
And his whole I'm gonna build a
special super sub,
a new technology for it, and it's we just need human effort and bravery and a cool dude who you're gonna call him pedophile for trying to save kids.
Yeah. That was our first question.
There we go.
We got another question.
We got another, 32 minutes. Not bad. Our next question comes from Apocalypse, and they say, impeachment fun fact, the last 6 presidents to take office in the U.S. have been threatened with impeachment or impeached, all by their opposing party. Impeaching Obama was a running joke in my high school. Politically, I don't know what I am. I'm just sitting here seeing 2 parties who would rather bicker with each other than work together. I email my senators about the subpoenaed documents and witnesses. Neither directly addressed my issue. Instead, they said Democrats targeting Trump. No reason for impeachment. House was unfair.
Right. All right. So let me talk about the idea of impeachment, because it's definitely an American thing. I think there's a no confidence. Canada does it differently. And I think, to me, it's important that there's a process in place for getting rid of someone who is damaging. If you have an election, you've got however many years. I think most time you just finish it out. But if there's somebody who's actually really dangerous for your country, you got to be able to get rid of them somehow. Mm-hmm. So the way that it's been framed as it's invalidating the previous election, no, it's not. If anything, impeachment is saying that the election was valid, and we've got other reasons why it turned out it was wrong.
Yeah, it's something enshrined in the Constitution to ensure that you don't just put somebody in and say, okay, 4 years, whatever happens is fine, we'll just grin and bear it.
Right.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right? And there's a big difference between threatening and actually impeaching. So you can threaten it because you can threaten anything, whether it's actually effective or not. So let me preface this by saying I think it's obvious, again, we are neither Democrat nor Republican. Mm-hmm. We are Canadian. We don't have a horse in this race. Mm-hmm. However, I think Canada skews a lot more towards some of the socialist ideas, principles.
More left-wing.
We like the idea of social safety nets. We like the idea of universal health care. Mm-hmm. We get it. We use it. It's kind of cool.
It's a good time. I like it, generally.
So I think it's worth looking at the actual impeachments and not just the threats, right? So the Bill Clinton, he was impeached for lying about an affair. Eventually, it all came out that he was having an affair, even though he initially denied it. Mm-hmm. And so the person who ended up taking the biggest hit for it was the person that he was having an affair with, a much younger woman who was not in a position of power. Right. She was actually had the least amount of power in that situation.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous to me. Again, here's the idea of naming it. It's all named after her, when really the person who's at issue is the person who was married, who was in a position of authority and power, and so should he have been impeached? I think absolutely, because as the president of the United States, if there's anything like this that he's trying to hide, and he was trying to hide it obviously when he was saying, "I did not have sex with that woman.
I did not have relations with that woman."
Oh no, he said sex. I think it was.
He said relations at a different time. Though.
Oh, okay.
That's like one of the quotes.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Because
like,
to me it was...
so you want to play a game of gotcha now?
Yeah, it was the semantics behind it, right? Like somehow oral sex was not sex.
Yeah.
Like only sexual intercourse is sex.
And he also said relations too, which is...
Okay,
you definitely did.
Okay. I don't remember that because it didn't stand out, but
It might have been like sexual relations. Might have been the... He said something.
So, but to me, that means he's compromised. You do not want a leader that has the secret information that he doesn't want to get out, because then somebody has leverage against him and can get him to do things that is not in his country's best interest.
And somebody who will also just look at your face and lie about a personal issue.
Right. I mean, it's separate from that. I mean, if it's a personal issue, that doesn't really matter. But clearly he was willing to lie under oath about it.
Yeah, and that's what I meant, is that there's reasons to potentially limit the information that you are releasing when directly asked about it, about certain internal affairs.
Right.
But when it is become an issue and you're willing to come out and make statements about it and directly lie about that, there's no sort of safety benefit to the country for lying about an affair.
Right. So and so the other guy who was impeached was Trump very recently. So he was impeached for... All right, so an ally, the Ukraine, had funding that was already promised to them.
Mm-hmm.
They knew it was coming. He withheld it as leverage for the Ukraine, and depending on who you listen to either announce that they were investigating Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, and Joe Biden being the front runner now, even more of a front runner for the Democratic nomination, or actually, or just announcing it, or actually trying to hunt down information. So, again, I think he absolutely should have been impeached, and he should have been pulled from power just the way Clinton should have been, because he admitted to every bit of fact that he was being accused of.
Yeah.
So, funding was withheld from an ally, the Ukraine. It was done without any, it was funding that had already been approved by, I can't keep track, House of Representatives, the senators, whatever. The Ukraine was aware of it. They knew that it was being withheld. He had a conversation and said, hey, do me this favor.
Yeah.
And he only released the money after he was caught. So when it was revealed that this is what happened, he allowed the transcript to come out, and it was at a point where he'd already been caught before he actually released the money. So you can't really go back and say, well, I
got it now.
You got it. Yeah, exactly, right? It lacks a certain credibility when you wait until you're actually caught.
Listen, everything else is in the past. The important part is, as of this particular moment in time, the money had got to them. And they didn't even do the investigation, so I didn't even get what I wanted. So I don't see why everybody's so mad about what I tried to do.
That's almost exactly it. Yeah, all right. So here's the funny thing, too. So you've got two sides of this coin, two impeachments, and I think when you have to look at whether which group is acting in good or bad faith. I have to say, the Republicans really don't come out smelling really great here. So you look at Kenneth Starr and Mitch McConnell, two of the many people defending Trump against his impeachment were making the exact opposite arguments when Clinton was impeached. Mm-hmm. So they were making the argument that absolutely this should be, these are impeachable offenses, and they're making the opposite argument when it comes to Trump.
Yeah. And this is not like a general endorsement of the Democrats. It's not to say that the people we think are better than the worst people are across the board.
Doesn't make them good. Yeah, doesn't make them good.
Yeah,
it's a low bar. It's a relatively low bar.
Some of them I think are good. Some of them I look at and I see the things they say and I genuinely think they are good. And people who have the best interests of others at heart. Like, there's a bunch of things that Obama did that are not ideal, right? Like, right. I think, you look at the sum total of the decisions of almost any president and you can find issues, but even separate from that, I think it's still fair to keep people accountable for things that they did that you don't like. Even like the nobody's perfect argument doesn't mean that you stop looking for things that people are screwing up.
Right. It's like saying if it's possible to pick a lock, if it's possible to break a lock, does that mean you just leave your door unlocked all the time? No, you still make the effort. It's still worth it, right? So if you look at both parties, I mean, because it's a false equivalent saying that the two parties are bickering and somehow they're both just as bad. Because when two people are fighting or two groups are fighting, that doesn't mean they both have legitimate complaint.
Yeah.
And to me, when you look at them and if you look at them and they say, one group is actually saying it's okay when we do it, but it's not okay when you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That somehow it becomes less a matter of doing the right thing than it is of winning.
Mm-hmm.
That's the group I do not want in power.
Oh, there was one really great video that I made you watch. Part of the alt-right playbook for Innuendo Studios, a thing where they're talking about they go high, we go low.
Right.
Right? With
Yes,
Republicans talking about the Democrats going to be the most obstructionist party that we've ever seen, and the whole keeping the Supreme Court spot unfilled, right?
Yes.
And not letting Obama put it in. I think that's a great video for reference. We might post that in the description, but you can also look up the alt-right playbook by Innuendo Studios, and it's one of those videos. It's a great series. We recommend checking out. It is very left-wing, so be ready for that, I guess.
Yeah.
But I think we make our political stances
Right.
clear. That shouldn't
Right.
come as a huge surprise to anybody.
Yeah. Yeah, but again, I think it's funny because the biggest argument against when you say a Democrat puts that up, it's that, well, you have vested interest, you're in it, so you obviously want your team to win.
Yeah.
But it strikes me that the kind of stuff that that they're willing to do has at least a little bit more consistency to it. It's not so. There's a word. I'm totally losing my mind now. It's not so. There isn't the same hypocrisy associated with it. So when they were making a big deal about,
It's not as like bad faith.
yeah, well, like so when they were making a big deal about Trump's, grab her by the pussy and stuff.
Yeah.
That when Al Franken got caught, he's Democratic something, senator, House of Represent. I don't remember.
I don't know.
But when that came up, he stepped down.
Yeah.
So there were Democrats that were calling for him to step down. There's nobody. I don't think there were anybody. Once he got elected, there's no Republicans that are asking Trump to step down because of that. So it's the standards that you hold yourself to, where somehow, again, things that you are happy to yell at other people for doing and saying that it's bad, but you're totally willing to let your own guy go.
Yeah.
I think that's again that's a telling kind of point.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I mean, in the case of impeachment, the Democrats were almost entirely unified, right?
Right.
But I think in a lot of cases, if you just look within the Democrats, they're not a particularly unified group.
Yeah.
They're not nearly as monolithic, right? Because you have within the Democrats, you have Democrats, and then you have like progressives, right?
Right.
And the sort of candidates that are being put forward and the platforms being held are increasingly split between Democrats and progressives, right? Where
Right.
Joe Biden is a Democrat, right? Like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders were the progressive candidates, right? And they're becoming increasingly sort of disparate. Whereas the Republican Party has, I think, a similar level of disparity in ideology, but they're a lot more monolithic in their sort of voting decisions.
Sure. Yeah, and this is the point, right? I mean, it's easy to project and call somebody else what you're doing, and people have accused the impeachment of being a partisan impeachment, and in my mind, as an outsider looking in, it's not so much a partisan impeachment as it was a partisan acquittal.
Yeah. I think both halves of the first half of the impeachment, right? It was partisan, but I don't think it should have been.
Right.
It was partisan because the Republicans put up a unified force to vote against it.
To resist it, right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it wasn't entirely partisan. Like, there were some Democrats who voted against it for
Different reasons.
but I think
Right.
insufficient reasons. Well, the who was it that voted yes on one but no on the other because they
Oh
thought
no,
that was
that was
fine,
Republican. That was
was that
Mitt Romney?
no, wasn't that
Mitt Romney?
really?
Yeah, Mitt Romney voted yes on one and no on the other.
There was also a Democrat who did that, wasn't there? Or no?
There might have been maybe a name, Tulsi Gabbard.
I don't remember. I remember somebody was saying that I think there was enough information to impeach him on the first count, but not the second, or something like that.
That was Mitt Romney.
Was that Mitt Romney?
That was
Okay,
Mitt
never
Romney.
mind. I thought that was.
Yeah.
I'm misinformed.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, there might be another one. Listen, I'm totally misinformed. Again, this is more like a hobby than a life or death kind of thing for me. So it's not like
Yeah. It affects the world just because America affects the world,
Right.
but Yeah, it's not like we're asking for handouts because we're gonna see any of the money that the social programs that they include are gonna.
All right, so we are so out of time.
We are.
And I had some other points about like insider trading. I guess maybe we'll do that next week.
Yeah, you know what? We'll keep talking about politics. Scarlet Enby's paying us $1 a month, and they want to hear it. So
totally
why
worth
not?
it.
Exactly. We talk about it anyways, but we know there's at least one person who wants to hear it who is invested in our content. So that's.
Thank you, Scarlet.
Yeah, there we go. We're gonna thank them already in just a second here. So.
Yeah.
You got an extra one this week. So yeah, we're out of time. We'd like to give thank yous to a couple different people. First off, a shout out to Eliza, no nickname Caton. Sometimes you just got to go back to the basics, like we did with our Q&A. This shout out has been brought to you by me. I brought the shout out to you just now. We'd also like to thank everybody who has supported us on Patreon. You want to take that away?
All right, so big thank you to Console Peasant and Edwoon, who are supporting us at the highest tier last word, Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier, Shawn, Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, and Brandon C., who support us on the credited level, and Chris Wolf and Scarlet Enby at the gratitude level.
Yeah, so thanks so much for your support, and we'll see you next time.
Komoda.